Good evening, and welcome back to the weird and the wonderful with strange bones. That's me. And tonight we are looking at a new and interesting place that may very well give us a number of topics to discuss, which may or may not include answers to some of the modern views of witches. So we're going to have a go and see what we can find. But as we begin, I do remind you that there are a great many different views as to what constitutes a witch. And what is important is both the view of the practitioner on the one side, but also the view of the society in which uh, it occurs. And over the course of different countries, cultures, and over time, the view can change quite severely. So I would remind everybody that we absolutely are not in this to either promote or denigrate any specific view or idea, but merely to look at what has happened and what might be for our personal interest, education, and amusement. I do remind you that on this channel, we have only got one rule, and that is because we have a large number of different peoples and viewpoints and cultures on this channel, so you may not be rude. Anyone that breaks this rule will be given the immortal boot, because we do not allow rudeness. Huge thanks to Lana for the likes. Uh, that said, however, we do not only approve, we actively promote different opinions on these things, as long as you are polite. We enjoy as many comments as possible, and certainly, should anyone wish to join the live and give their opinions, we would be glad to have you as well. And as we do that, thank you so much to Isaac Hubert. I'm going to ask you to remember that we do what we do because of you. So, like, share, subscribe, and do all of those wonderful things that promote the channel. And with that, our topic on today's Weird and Wonderful is witches. What are they? Are they good? Are they bad? Should we worry? Where do they come from? What is the historical view of such things, and how exactly has it got its way into the modern age? And as you may know on this channel, when we look at our weird and wonderful things, we like to bounce from country to country to see the differences and compare. And to give you a little bit of a background to what we have discovered thus far, in a number of countries, what we can very, very, very broadly refer to as a user of the arcane or of magic is not always called a witch. In a number of countries, a witch is specifically the bad one. But you get others who also do make use of magic and such that have other names. Now, we can argue, of course, that surely if you use magic, you are a kind of witch, and that might be true. But we do need to keep in mind that words change meanings, as you get around. So it doesn't always have the same meaning everywhere, and that matters greatly. Also, it doesn't always have the same viewpoint. So if you were to ask, for example, a modern day Wiccan, is a witch good? They are very, very likely to say yes, of course. Uh, and the majority of modern witches, I think, would agree with that. They do not approve of or engage in the malevolent parts of the art, though there are those that do, of course. But you might find that even those who within the craft say they're good, those outside might have a very different opinion. And of course, this contrast has over history caused a number of problems um, which have ended very, very badly for a lot of people. So keep all of that in mind before we even begin, because we will find out whether or not the same is said of the current place. And of course, the current place we are going to be talking about, I think, is going to be one of the very, very interesting ones in terms of witchcraft, simply because it is from here that modern Wicca evolves. And we are, of course, talking about Great Britain, the English Isles, including, of course, a number of the associated places around. Now, what are witches? Well, the word witch in English does in fact come from the Old English, which is no longer spoken by anyone. Um, and the word in Old English was witcher, which has evolved in the modern pronunciation to Wicca. But by and large, in the Old English view of things, witches were generally not called witches. And I think the reason for that might be partly cultural, but they were known as cunning folk. Primarily, they practiced a mix of magic and medicine, healings and things using charms, herbal remedies, incantations, and more to cure illnesses, protect people and livestock, or to influence crops and children. Their practices involve spoken spells, written charms, and sometimes the use of amulets and potions to achieve worldly ends. In later periods, the perception of witches shifted, with a greater focus moving on to darker and more demonic witchcraft, wherein you got the accusations of pacts with the devil and the use of familiars. But it didn't begin that way by any manner or form, um, because the concept of the devil obviously is a Christian one, and Christianity only arrived in England much later. So, where we begin, and obviously you have, amongst other things, not just witches, but druids and more. And that will be going really far back, and we're going to stick with witches for now. So, varying use of spoken spells, plants and herbs, charms, rhyming charms are very popular in Old English witchcraft, along with potions and things. Amulets and enchanted objects, very popular as well, um, which is quite different to the witches we have encountered thus far, um, such as the Kiramblé and such where those kind of things weren't really used at all. Now, cunning folk created and used written charms consisting of specific words to provide protection, assist with love, and ward off evil spirits. And we know for fact that the runic alphabets played a part in this, whether they were the Irish version or whether they were the Germanic, which came over with the Anglo-Saxons. The written word held great power, and saying things held a lot more strength than they do these days. So nowadays, if I said to you, for example, I hate you, I wish you were dead, people would just say I was being nasty. Back in the day, to say something like that could very much result in me um, being found guilty of witchcraft and even punished for it, depending on who it was said to and how bad what I said, even execution, because words were considered to be almost as powerful as an act itself. And because of that, I strongly suspect that that is why a spell is called a spell, because it is something that has evolved through spelling. An interesting little something to add to your understanding of English witchcraft. Now, potions and herbal concoctions could be used for all kinds of things, especially as medicine, but also with a number of other things dependent on how it worked. I see that my dear friend Karina has snuck in. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you are in fine and fabulous form and are having a truly wondrous uh, a wondrous day. Sneaky, sneaky. She is all the way in another country, so she doesn't always get to join us because of the time difference. She is laboring away hard at work and sneaking off just to keep an eye on me. But yes, she is sneaky, sneaky. But welcome, nevertheless. It's lovely to have you. So as we progress with this consideration, we need to look at the spoken aspect. Karina, thank you so much for a donut. I do wish I could eat a real one. I do love donuts, but alas, these days they no longer love me. So the spoken words, not something big in the African or African derived witchcraft at all, where music and dance is far more important. In English witchcraft, we are talking speaking. Spells, ritualistic words were integral to their practices, and the belief that specific words at specific points in a process could activate the magic as well. Now, this changed over time from the old sort of viewpoints in how this all went, from the carving of runes and more. And really and truly, we can accuse the arrival of Christianity for this, because the difference in viewpoint met with clashes. And it was perceived that the witches who worshipped a number of different deities, including the horned god, was in fact a worship of the devil, and therefore all witches were automatically evil, and witches gave their souls in exchange for power to the devil. And along with this, of course, witches were said to have familiars. And what is a familiar? Well, a familiar is a shortening of familiar beast, uh, or familiar spirit. Familiar spirits were animal shaped, and it aided them in their magical practices. And this is an evolution, I think. Uh, it's argued, but I think that this is an evolution of the concept of a fetch. Your fetch is your other self, which you can meet through varying magical medications. And by binding with your fetch, you can achieve higher paths in your power. But it often would appear in animal form. But in a strange kind of way, it is essentially you. But this, of course, would not have been understood, and so they were deemed to be demons and familiar demons. And there, of course, it immediately turned round that if you had any kind of pet, you were probably a witch, and if it was a cat, almost doubly so. Um, so things got twisted from outside views. And from that, of course, witches were seen not as healers, but as the cause of natural disasters, diseases, misfortunes, and more. But this in itself created a culture of magic whereby a great many people almost immediately then required some form of counter magic against these threats. And therefore, you had the development of the use of horseshoes, witch bottles, and puppets, and more to ward off evil. So it seems that we have a great deal to discuss, and with it, of course, a number of the more famous from history, which some of them were actually pretty awful. And it wasn't that they had their view and other people thought of them as whatever, but rather that they embraced that idea and did indeed attempt, at the very least, to
So I want
become
to start by telling you guys a little.
um, a worshipper of the devil in that regard, which is quite interesting. So perhaps it was a self fulfilling property. But let's have a quick overview here. So, the witches of Great Britain primarily refer to individuals accused, tried, and sometimes executed for witchcraft between the 15th and 18th century, with the last of the executions in the 17th century, and the practice of witchcraft being criminalized until 1736. Before that, it, they weren't called witches. Um, they were called cunning folk, or something in that general direction. The idea of the word witch was something that was taken up in more modern times um, for that regard. So we know that between the 15th and 18th century was when the big witch hunts occurred and the trials, especially during the English Civil War, where religion was the big deal between the Catholics and the Protestants. And of course, that made everybody even more on edge and more difficult for people to be anything other than what you were told to be by the current boss. So, by and large, cunning folk were part of village life, healers and more, and they were the good kind for the most part. But that was not um, a commonly held viewpoint. Uh, and we know this because in 1563, the Act Against Conjurations made witchcraft punishable by death. And in 1736, the Witchcraft Act of 1735 was passed, uh, repealing earlier laws but punishing those who falsely claimed magical powers. Now, notable people that mattered in 1612, the Pendle witches, which were very famous. And of course, in 1619, the witches of Belvoir. Um, Matthew Hopkins was an important fellow who was the Witchfinder General during the Civil War, and he had a lot of people um, executed, imprisoned, and more, and tortured as well in the name of finding the witches. He was quite a frightening bugger, to be honest. Now, by the end of the 17th century, um, the use of torture and standards of evidence in judicial scrutiny changed and improved, leading not only to fewer prosecutions, but also a change in the view of how you're supposed to go about treating people. And it is thought that the last person to be put on trial for witchcraft was in fact in the 20th century, in a case that highlighted the persistence of basic magical beliefs, particularly in Scotland, and that was Helen Duncan. So, a number of interesting stories uh, that we can touch on about the English witches. But as we begin, I'm going to move us on to the witch trials because they are where we see a great deal of interest. And while much of it is very, very likely to be skewed by the writers as their opinion was not favorable, nevertheless, it gives us quite a large understanding. Now, we do know that there is an estimation between the 15th and 18th century that maybe around 500 people were actually executed, 90% of which were women. It was most intense between 1642 and 1651 in the English Civil War and the Puritan era of the mid 17th century. So we do know that even during the Middle Ages, witch trials were known to have occurred, but these cases were few and were mainly concerned towards people that were part of the elite with political purposes, which is something we are not surprised about at all. Much thanks to uh, Tristan for the like, but I'm sorry to tell you that I am absolutely not AI. I am very much a real person, and I am quite glad to be so. So, thank you for your comment, nevertheless. Why did you say it? I'm kind of curious now. Do I sound too flat? Nevertheless, moving along. Um, Examples of these kind of trials were the ones against Eleanor Cobham, who was an English noblewoman and first the mistress and then the second wife of the Duke of Gloucester in 1441. She was forcibly divorced and sentenced to life imprisonment for treasonable necromancy, a punishment that probably was entirely untrue. But it was a good way to get rid of somebody. Another one in 1441 was Marjorie Jourdemain, the Witch of Eye next Westminster, who was an Englishwoman who was accused of false belief and witchcraft. She was probably sentenced, however, by a church court. Um, so we're not too sure much of the circumstances there. Endless thoughts, welcome, yay. So glad that you joined. It's lovely to have you back, and we are on to the English witches. So I hope you brushed up on your questions. But you can very much see that um, while she got a lifetime of imprisonment um, and possibly an execution, it was very much a political situation where what they were doing was getting people out of the way that might otherwise have interfered with the desired results. But it was in the second half of the 16th century that wild scale witch hunts took place in England. The cases became more common towards the end of the 16th century and the early 17th century, particularly since the succession of James VI to the throne. King James had shown a great interest in good evening to you. My tongue is not working. A great interest in witch trials since the Copenhagen ones in 1589, which inspired the North Berwick witch trials in Scotland in 1590. And when he succeeded the English throne in 1603, he sharpened the English Witchcraft Act in the very next year. So they were most common in the first half of the 17th century, reached, as I said, the most intense phase during the English Civil War. And in this particular period, we get Matthew Hopkins turning up. And things got very, very intense. Now, pretty much everybody across England in this time, irrespective of status, believed in witches, and witchcraft became a capital offence under Henry VIII in 1542, but it was repealed 5 years later. But things got to new heights yet again, and it was classed as a felony under the statute of Elizabeth I, and thousands of people, mostly women, became falsely accused or were forced to confess under torture and thereafter immediately punished. So, not a very nice thing, but there you go. So, there was a whole lot of legalities. Certain people did work against these laws for the betterment of general public, but in England it was not as common to be accused of having attended a witch's sabbath or having made a pact with Satan. The typical victim was usually a poor old woman with a bad reputation who was accused of having a familiar or having caused harm to other people's livestock by use of sorcery. So it was less of a satanic panic, if you will, than in some places. Now, in a small community where everybody knows each other, and you must remember, the average person in this time never went more than 10 miles from their own home in their entire life. That was pretty much a fact for a long time. I know for a fact that in my own family going back, most people were born and died in the same house, and that was not uncommon. And that was as recent as 50 years ago. So travel was not a big thing. So in a small community where people really know each other, you definitely get some serious disagreements and grudges that last. Thanks for the live to Hannah. And yes, endless thoughts. Very much so. Certain people, of course, did travel and could travel, but it wasn't a general thing. So grudges could last, and a quick way to sort these things out was with a good old accusation. So Saint Osyth, uh, a small community who was ready to unleash those disagreements by sharing them with a judge like Justice Darcy to gain something more from their peers, was not an uncommon such thing. Many early English villages at this time depended on the barter system due to poverty, uh, which is an explanation as to why begging was a part of many trials. People were so well versed in these skills, living them day to day, that they were ready to squabble in court as they would have done in the market. Accusing somebody as a witch was a quick and easy way to get back at people. Normally, people sentenced for witchcraft in England, despite the common belief, were not burnt. There were very few places where people were executed by fire. It was an unusual method. Normally, you were hanged. That was the standard method. Now, there were exceptions, and on occasion, people were burnt. It is not that it didn't happen. So, Mary Lakeland, for example, was burned at the stake in Ipswich on the 9th of September in 1645, having been judged for witchcraft. But it wasn't for witchcraft that she was burnt, but because she has used the witchcraft to murder her husband. So, the latter crime was just what the punishment was for, whereas the former was considered to be petty treason. Um, actually, more recent, Endless Thoughts, more recent than you might think. And yes, you are quite correct. The name witch was given to dehumanize somebody, very much so. It was an easy way. But you'll be surprised at how recent the last trial was, and we are going to get to that. We know that Margaret Reed of King's Lynn in 1590, Mary Oliver of Norwich in 1659, and Ursula Kemp, who went through many accusations and ended up being hanged. She was known to reside in the cage during her trial. In medieval times, the cage, which is a type of prison, was often a form of public humiliation and confinement to punish criminals. The structure was typically a small barred enclosure, sometimes suspended in public places like market squares, um, where individuals were left exposed to the elements. So it was not only a form of physical restraint, but also served to publicly shame the prisoner, reinforcing the societal power dynamics of punishment and authority, which is quite interesting. Now, we know that there was a lot of politics and religious tensions that went on that absolutely influenced a great deal of things. And the end of the witchcraft prosecutions, the 1682 Bideford witch trial, resulted in the last of few people confirmed to have been executed for witchcraft in England. But the last was in fact in 1716. Mary Hicks, whose story is actually recorded, and given how difficult printing and such was in those times, she got an 8-pager about it, which is pretty impressive. In 1730, Jane Wenham was one of the last people to be condemned to death for witchcraft in England, but her conviction was set aside. Her trial in 1712 is erroneously considered to be the last witch trial in England, but it was not. The Witchcraft Act in 1735 finally concludes prosecutions for alleged witchcraft. So things did finally stop. But bear in mind, under English law fell also the colonies, including the 13 colonies of North America and the Connecticut witch trials in the 16th century, 17th century, in fact, is a result of that, and the Salem witch trials were part of it. So, a number of interesting things in that regard. Now, jumping back to, where are we? Helen Duncan. That is our sought after individual. Where's my notes on it, because it matters. I've lost Helen Duncan, you poor person. There we go. Gotta have Helen Duncan. So Helen Duncan was actually a MacFarlane, if that matters. If you're Scottish, can we blame anyone for being properly Scottish? She was the last person to be imprisoned under the Witchcraft Act. She was not, in fact, executed, to the best of my knowledge. She had 9 months imprisonment, and she got out of jail in 1945. But she was arrested again in 1956, and she died in Edinburgh in her home a bit after this. So we're talking middle of the 19th for the last trial, which is incredibly recent right there, and quite unexpected. Nevertheless, with that amusement going on, and the varying witch trials, we are going to point out that in Essex alone, around 1,000 people were accused of witchcraft from the 15th to the 1800s. They included people like Elizabeth Lowys, a cunning woman, not a witch, a cunning woman, the old term, who was the first known to be sentenced to death for murder by magic in 1564. So very, very interesting in that regard. Now, 7 places connected to witchcraft in England, and why. We know that there are a couple of interesting ones. So, Fisherton Anger in Salisbury in Wiltshire. Now, we're not too sure who the first person to be executed for witchcraft was due to lack of documents. But from what does still exist, one of the first we know of was Agnes Mills of Wiltshire, and she was executed at Fisherton Anger, which is now called Salisbury. And you know, of course, Salisbury Plain, which is where, of course, Stonehenge is. So, very magical area right off bat. and she was accused of having killed the infant William Bainton by means of witchcraft. Now, the story highlights how supposed witchcraft could be a source of income for women. Allegedly, Agnes was paid to commit the murder by Dorothy Bainton, wife of the infant's uncle. And next in line as heir to Sir Edward Bainton, a wealthy family with royal connections. And right off bat, there is your reasoning and your politics and more, which shows that we are less worried about what you do as why you do it. Interestingly, another supposed witch named Jane Marsh was paid to help in the trial. She declared that Agnes Mills had undertaken the killing and that Dorothy Bainton had been the procurer. Afterwards, Agnes Mills confessed and was hanged. But unfortunately for Jane, the Baintons then threatened that unless she denied her statement about Dorothy, she would be left in prison herself, and she spent 18 months in jail before she revoked her statement. So it seems that nobility trumps all, even witchcraft. Now, Colchester Castle in Essex is also an important place because self-proclaimed witch-finder General Matthew Hopkins was the most notorious witch hunter of the 1640s. He jailed and interrogated those he believed to be witches at Colchester Castle. The interrogation took place in the castle's dark cells, where many are believed to have died as a result of their incarceration and their questioning, even before coming to any formal court. In Essex, as we say, a lot of it went on, and much of it was due to Matthew Hopkins. Now, Tuesday's Marketplace in King's Lynn in Norfolk, that was the scene of a number of public executions of alleged witches, which probably included Mother Gabley, who was the first person condemned in Norfolk under the Act Against Conjurations, Enchantments, and Witchcrafts. Gabley was accused of causing the death of 13 men who had sailed from Spain to England. Allegedly, she boiled eggs in cold water, stirring vigorously to raise a storm at sea. The most famous execution was Margaret Reed, found guilty in 1590 and burned alive. Legend has it, while being consumed by flames, her heart jumped from her body and hit the wall opposite, leaving a permanent burn on the brick. It's a good story, but the front of the building in question actually dates from the 18th century. So the truth cannot be the case. Unless the older place did and was therefore then thereafter knocked flat. Who's to say? Now, Mother Shipton, very interesting one, and apparently something of a prophetess as well. She is quite a legendary figure who, if she did exist, probably lived in York in the 1530s. Her story first appeared in a pamphlet in 1641, where she is said to have predicted that Cardinal Wolsey would not reach York in 1530. Later accounts claim that she was born Ursula Sustel in 1488. She is believed to have been a witch and an oracle who morbidly predicted the day's reckoning and tragedies that were to befall the Tudor monarchy. And she had a cave where she lived, apparently. She is said to have died at the age of 73. She is said from her prophecies to have foreseen the Spanish Armada in 1588 and the Great Fire of London in 1666. In 17th century depictions, she was showed as an elderly woman with a deformed shape, which is probably entirely built out of the classic view of what a witch was supposed to look like. The claim that Mother Shipton was born in Knaresborough was first made from a pamphlet in the 1686. The wells and springs there had been attracting tourists since the 16th century, and the story might well have been used to promote the place a little. We're not sure. But it does appear that she was a real person, which is quite interesting. Um, can we say more than that? Not a lot. Records are scanty, alas. The next interesting place, and one which we will go into a great deal more, is Pendle Hill, one of the most famous witch trials in English history, with the Pendle witches in 1612, where 12 accused witches who lived in the forests of Pendle were charged with the murders of 10 people through witchcraft. The massive confessions included trials, uh, recalled events up to 18 years before, and involved tensions between families, neighbors, landlords, and tenants. Um, the events leading to the trials began in March of 1612 when Alison Device was accused of witchcraft after a peddler refused to buy her pins and claimed she had bewitched him. Her family, along with Anne Whitty and her daughter, were arrested and sent for trial. Meanwhile, their family members held a meeting in Malkin Tower in the forest of Pendle, where a plot to free the prisoners and destroy the castle was discussed. The location of the site is still unclear, though it may be close to present-day Malkin Tower Farm. The meeting was seen, of course, as a witches' Sabbath. This led further to investigations and the eventual involvement of several families who were accused of witchcraft and plotting with the devil. Key witnesses in the trial was one of the accused 9-year-old daughter, her testimony leading to the execution of her mother, sister, and brother. One of the accused died in custody, another was found not guilty, and the other 10 were found guilty and hanged. Another interesting thing is Townmoor in Newcastle, where 30 people were accused and brought to the town hall to be tried as witches. The trial involved being publicly stripped and searched for devil's marks and pricked with a pin. The belief was that a witch couldn't feel pain in a certain spot, and if that spot was found where you didn't feel the pin prick you, it was proof of a devil's mark, and therefore you were a witch. Now, it is also known, and here is an important point, that if I was a witch finder and I came to your village and said, "Hey, not a witch among you," I basically was told, "Well, thanks," and off I went. Whereas if I came and found 10 witches, I was paid for each one. So as you can imagine, a number of the witch finders made use of retractable pins, to ensure we found a couple. Man's got to live, right? Now, the trials here ended with 14 women and 1 man condemned to death, and the gallows were built on the town moor to execute them publicly. All of the deceased were buried in unmarked graves at St. Andrew's Church in the city centre on Newgate Street. It is a twist of fate that the witch finder who led the accusations of the group was later arrested, tried, and hanged for causing the deaths of 220 people, probably deservedly. York Castle Prison is another place connected with witches. And of course, it is here that Mary Bateman was executed for witchcraft and murder. Mary wasn't formally accused of witchcraft. In fact, she was prosecuted for fraud and murder. But the media highlighted her popularity for telling fortunes, making charms, and referred to her as the Yorkshire Witch. It was her claims of being able to cure people that led to the death of her victim, Rebecca Perigo, in 1808. Mary treated her with white powders for a nervous ailment, instructing her to mix them into a pudding, and Rebecca died a week after eating it. They found that it was corrosive mercury powder, which led to her arrest, a charge of murder, and hanging. And this occurred 3 days after her trial. The story of the Yorkshire Witch drew 5,000 people to witness the hanging, and more lining the road to see her coffin travel to the Leeds General Infirmary, where hospital staff charged threepence to view her corpse. You've got to make money? Why not? And it's not like Mary was able to complain, was she? So it shows that witch beliefs and such like, sorry, I have a terrible itch on my foot, have lasted right into the 19th century. And of course, even till today, though nowadays, witchcraft doesn't lead to your being executed. Nevertheless, the parliamentary view of all of these things, what was it and why was it? And the answer to that we are now going to quickly review before we look at further aspects of these things. So, according to the parliamentary notes of original laws, witchcraft was the perceived facility to summon evil spirits and demons to do harm to others. And it is through the medieval church that many of these accusations came, and they had the power to punish those who dabbled in magic and sorcery. Priests were apparently able to exorcise those who had become possessed by malign spirits. People believed not only in witchcraft, but perceived it very much as the workings of the devil. And they kind of felt that this was where all the bad things in life came from because of witchcraft. Now, in 1542, Parliament passed the Witchcraft Act, which defined witchcraft as a crime punishable by death. It was repealed, but in 1562 it was put back. Further law was passed in 1604 during the reign of James I, who took a keen interest in demonology to the extent that he even published a book on it. But what it also did was move the trial of witches away from the church and into ordinary courts. Witch hunting became a big thing, and by 1736, Parliament passed an act repealing the laws against witchcraft, but imposing fines and imprisonment on people who claimed to use magical powers. So By this time, of course, we are well into the industrial uh, revolution. And when this bill came in, it caused quite a lot of laughter in the House of Commons because um, among the MPs, for example, was John Conduit, whose wife was the niece of Sir Isaac Newton. Um, and of course, as you can imagine, science was king at the time, and nobody believed in magic after all, or did they? So, as we look at the way things were, many people in this time saw witchcraft as bad. But prior to that, witches were good. They were cunning folk, and they were part of ordinary life, very much the same way as in South Africa. You will find the Isangoma and Inyanga is just an ordinary part of life. Um, you had to keep off the bad spirits of varying varieties, and it was them that did it. We know that Charles II, interestingly enough, uh, was very interested in sorcery. Now, often cunning folk involved in healing were known as strokers because they would stroke a patient's afflicted area with a charm. Valentine Greatstrakes, otherwise known as the Stroker, was an Irish face healer who toured England in 1666, claiming to cure people of scrofula, wounds, ulcers, simply by placing his hand on them. And he was so famous, he even went to treat King Charles II um, at court. Interestingly, and you may not have known this, hedgehogs were very much associated with witchcraft. Witches were said to have a familiar, a small demon that could be sent out to do their bidding. Now, we know that in North America you had skinwalkers, pretty much a similar style of thing. In South Africa, you have the tokolos. Well, the English witches had their familiars, and commonly this creature would be a cat. Um, but also dogs, toads, and other small animals were often thought to be, and hedgehogs were often thought to be the witches' aids. Some people believed that these animals were the witches themselves, shape shifting and venturing outside to cause mischief. And we do know that hares, which is something similar to a rabbit, but is not a rabbit, were also considered to be strongly associated with witches. Now, the other interesting thing, which is very much an English development, is the bellamine, which is a witch's bottle, uh, very often considered to be malevolent. Uh, a potion consisted of hair, urine, and other nasty things provided by the victim of the curse, pins, needles, and wine. The bottles were then burned or buried somewhere within a house, and the evil would be captured and impaled upon the pins and drowned by the wine. Bellamines were discovered all over varying old houses, and they were the one way to capture a curse and stop it from harming the victim. And it was generally considered to be very effective. Now, an interesting best selling book changed the way people felt about witchcraft. And of course, we are talking about 1486. A German clergyman called Heinrich Kramer wrote the absolutely famous Hammer of the Witches, the Malleus Maleficarium. And the author derided witchcraft, drawing a connection between sorcery and the devil, and endorsed the extermination of witches. The Hammer of Witches became an absolute bestseller, outperforming every publication in Europe except for the Bible for almost 200 years. And this basically made it the witch hunting handbook and sealed the doom of anyone accused of witchcraft, which then followed by Henry VIII making witchcraft a crime, and Matthew Hopkins getting his day. And we will talk more about him as well. Now, how do you know who is a witch? And an interesting thing that Endless Thoughts pointed out was the fact that witches are supposed to be hook-nosed, warty, and green-skinned, and there is a certain amount of reason behind her saying that. So, warts. Women with prominent warts or moles were thought to have the devil's mark and then therefore had to be witches. Some suspects were subjected to swimming, where they were tied up and thrown into a river. If they were floating, they were a witch and would be executed. If they sank and drowned, at least it's okay because you were innocent and not a witch. Dead, yes, but not a witch. Now, witchcraft, of course, is still practiced in Britain today, with a great many people following it on. And we will talk about the founders of modern witchcraft as well, because it really does matter. So,
if this is your first time listening to the Mystery Machine,
for some reason that popped up. Sorry about the video. Now, we've spoken about these varying spots and the frightening things that occurred. So let us jump on to the Witches of Belvoir. Now, the Witches of Belvoir were a mother and her two daughters accused of witchcraft in England and the deaths of two young brothers, Henry and Francis Manners. The heirs to the Francis Manners and the 6th Earl of Rutland, whose seat was in Belvoir Castle. The mother, Joan Flower, died on the way to her trial after the apprehension around Christmas, while Philippa and Margaret were executed by hanging in 1619. Now, Joan, Margaret, and Philippa Flower were known to be herbal healers that came from a local family that had fallen on hard times. Yes, we have. Endless Source points out that we've known people practicing witchcraft right here at home. Absolutely, we do. I know quite a few. So, no shock there at all. Now, these particular ladies accepted employment as servants at the Belvoir Castle, which is near Grantham in Lincolnshire. And when additional staff were needed for the upcoming visit by King James I. But the sisters and their mother were unpopular with the other staff, and there were suggestions of theft and misdemeanors. All three were dismissed, and only Joan was given payment of severance amounting to 40 shillings, a pillow, and a mattress of wool. After the Flowers were dismissed, the Earl and the Countess fell ill, suffering from vomiting and convulsions. Their son and heir, Henry, died and was buried. Their younger children, Francis and daughter Catherine, suffered similarly. Francis died in March of 1620. Now, the important point is that the death of the two boys left the Earl without a male heir, and the earldom passed on to his brother after his own death. 3 years after this, 9 women were hanged as witches in Leicestershire for having bewitched a young boy, and in charges similar to those in the Flowers case were said to have kept cats as familiar. but it was 5 years after the Flowers were dismissed from Belvoir Castle and following the death of the second son that the Rutlands had them arrested just before Christmas. After initial examinations in 1619, the women were taken to Lincoln jail. The arrested Joan Flower professed innocence. She was not known to be a churchgoer, but at Ancaster, en route to the prison at Lincoln, she asked for bread as a substitute for the Eucharist. She claimed that something so blessed could not be consumed by a witch, and so she ate it in front of them and then choked on it and died. So maybe she was. Thank you, Dricky. Is any of this magic real, and how can I learn it, and why is this not taught in schools? Well, it's not taught in schools because these days it's considered to be bad, and you shouldn't know it. Is any of it real? Well, possibly. Can you learn it? Oh, absolutely. There is quite a few places you can learn quite a bit of this stuff. And indeed, I've even come across courses you can take online if you can't go to an actual class. There is a whole ton depending on the type, style, and methodology that you prefer. So, very much so, and we will talk about the schools shortly because, yes, you can learn it. So mommy choked and passed on. At Lincoln, Margaret accused her mother, while Philippa admitted to witchcraft on behalf of herself, Margaret, and Joan. They said that they had entered in communion with familiar spirits that assisted them with their schemes. Their mother's familiar was a cat named Rutterkin. The women admitted that they stole a glove from Lord Ros and gave it to their mother, who dipped it in boiling water and stroked it along Rutterkin's back and pricked it. Combined with some incantations, this caused Lord Ros to become ill and die. An attempt to harm Lady Catherine, the Earl's daughter, failed when it found out that Rutterkin had no power over her. The woman had also taken some feathers from the quilt of Rutland's bed and a pair of gloves. By boiling these in water mixed with blood, they cast spells to prevent the Earl and Countess from having any more children. Both women admitted to experiencing visions of devils and that their familiar spirits visited them and fed upon their bodies, which is suitably gross. Now, during the examination, they also said that Anne Baker, Joan Wilmot, and Ellen Green also helped them. The three women were taken for examination, and it was found that they too were witches, and they admitted to some of it. So it seems this was a thing, but they did say that they were rather not witches, but cunning women, and that they never hurt anybody but helped diverse persons that were stricken or forspoken, bewitched, and that her spirit came weekly to her, and would tell of diverse persons that were stricken. And she saith that the use which she had of the spirit was to know those did which she had undertaken to amend, and she could help them by prayers which she used. Essentially, though, they admitted they were witches, and as a result, Margaret and Philippa were hanged on at Lincoln Castle, and even to this day, there is an inscription that shows that it was absolutely believed that the people were killed by sorcery. And there's been varied stories that came out thereafter. So, yeah, don't admit to witchcraft when you've been accused of murder, I suppose. They will get you. Now, how bad was it? Well, in England, it wasn't as bad as in Scotland, but there were a number of notable ones, and it wasn't small either. So, absolutely, it had quite a serious effect in that regard. Um, but where did it start? In Old English, you speak of witchcraft. Uh, from Anglo-Saxon England, belief and practice of magic by the Anglo-Saxons between the 5th and 11th centuries. Surviving evidence in the beliefs does exist, but not as much. And it's mostly from after England had been Christianized, which therefore the whole things are a little skewed because it's recorded by monks and such. And they tend to look on it as an evil kind of thing. If I were to have hair, what hairstyle would I have? Well, don't I quite understand the reason for the question, but I can tell you that when I did have hair, I had it long and it hung down past my shoulders. It was bone white naturally, and I never did anything with it except occasionally comb it. So no style at all. Now, we know that it was all about using the varying practices and techniques for mostly the betterment of society. They were a cross between your priest, your doctor, your psychologist, and more. It was generally a polytheistic faith, which included local spirits, but also the Anglo Saxon version of the Chthonic deities. So you had Odin, Thor, Tyr, and Freya, except with Anglo-Saxon names. So Woden, Thunor, Tu, and Frigge. And you will find, in fact, that the runes changed from the 25 Chthonic versions to 32 in the Anglo-Saxon variety, and lasted for quite a while. The Irish runes were particularly only used within Ireland and didn't come down into the rest of England for whatever reasons. Now, the problem is that it's very hard to quite understand how it worked. We do know that music was important, but it's not certain as whether dance was. And the harpers, at least among the Irish, were considered to be a former sorcerer as well. And many of the harpers were also druids. So Taliesin was a bard, but by and large, you will find that bards were magical because of their mastery of words, and words are very important in that kind of examination as such. And Jeremy, do not make comments like that, please. Not on this one. We have one rule, and that's don't be rude, and you are verging closely on that. So I'm going to ask you please to desist. Otherwise, we will apply the boot. So we do know that they were very important people. They were the background and backbone of society by and large. And you get accounts from people right back in the 9th and 10th centuries of witches that were around at the time. And in fact, William of Malmsey speaks of one that passed away in his time. And in his account, he says, she was well versed in witchcrafts and was not ignorant of ancient auguries, a patroness and arbiter also of lasciviousness and gluttony, and set no limit on her debauches. She owned a pet jackdaw that one day made more noise than usual, and she interpreted it as a sign of bad news. A messenger soon arrived telling her that her entire family had been unalived in an unspecified disaster. Overcome, she took to her bed and realized then a fatal disease was overcoming her. And she summoned her 2 children, one of whom was a monk and one of whom was a nun, and gave them special instructions for her burial, which included being sewn up in the skin of a stag, laid on a stone coffin, the lid fastened down with lead and iron, and a heavy stone bound with 3 iron chains to attach thereon. And for 50 days, masses must be prayed for her, with psalms sung for 50 nights. And if I lie secure for these 3 nights, on the 4th day bury your mother in the ground, though I fear the earth, which was so often burdened by my wicked acts and will be loath to accept me. Apparently, they actually did this. But on the 2nd of the nights, while they were praying, devils broke into the church, snapped through the chains, and took her out, dragging her from the tomb. He placed her, the devil himself placed her on a waiting black horse with hooks protruding from its back, and they all vanished, with her cries being heard as far as 4 miles away. Really a dramatic account, but it does reveal to us something of the way people thought about this kind of thing, which maybe tells us something. But it does show that witches were known to be around, and some of them were okay, and some of them were definitely not. So be that as you might take it. Now, one of the most famous witches coming to a more modern time was Sybil Leek, who gained fame in the mid 20th century as a white witch, astrologer, and occult author, and dubbed as Britain's most famous witch by the BBC. She was known for having a pet jackdaw and writing books on esoteric subjects before eventually moving to America. Another important person was Robert Cochrane, who was a pioneering neo-pagan and the founder of the Clan of Tubal Cain in the 1960s. But these are not the important ones. The important ones are others. So we've spoken of the very old ones like the Lancashire witches of Pendle, who very much were very interesting people. And of course, they give us the names of certain families that are said to really and truly have strong roots in witchcraft, which includes the Devices, the Demdikes, the Nutters, and more, which absolutely there are several connections to witches therein. And while a lot of the accusations were possibly spurious, nevertheless, they were very real, and people were very, very afraid. Um, and of course, the Pendle witches were connected to the Salisbury witches, uh, which were charged with both child murder and cannibalism. The Padiham witch, who was said to be able to have killed a horse from a distance, and more. So there were a lot of fears for these things, and the story gets really, really interesting. So there's no lack that matters in this regard, and which resulted in a lot of nastiness. Um, but we are going to move away from all of that, and we are instead going to talk about modern Wicca. Now, what is it? Why is it? And the answer that we do need to go back to is a chap by the name of Gerald Gardner, who was born in 13th of June 1884 in Lancashire, England, and he died on the 12th of February in 1964 at the age of 79 on ship en route to Tunisia. He was a tea and rubber planter customs officer, and besides that, one of the first Wiccan priests and a writer, and he was married to Dorothy Rosedale. Now, he was known by the craft name Shire, and he was an English Wiccan author. He was instrumental in bringing modern pagan religion of Wicca to public attention and writing some of its absolutely definitive religious texts and founding one of the two most important schools of Wicca, which is Gardnerian Wicca. He spent a lot of his childhood in Madeira, Ceylon, Malaysia, and more before learning and even writing a book about all the magical practices there. When he came back, he had written a number of things on magic, and he settled in New Forest and joined an occult group, the Rosicrucian Order Crotona Fellowship. And through this group, he encountered the New Forest Coven, into which he was initiated in 1939. So Wicca had kind of been going on even before, but it wasn't well known by any means. And Gardner portrayed the coven as a survival of the theoretical witch cults and discussed the works of Margaret Murray, a theory that's now discredited. He supplemented the covenant's rituals with items borrowed from Freemasonry, ceremonial magic, and the writings of Aleister Crowley to form the Gardnerian tradition. Now, Aleister Crowley was a dodgy bugger who claimed to be the most evil man this century when he was alive. But an interesting person, nevertheless. He became intent on propagating this religion, attracting media attention, and writing about it in a number of articles and books. And he introduced a string of high priestesses into the religion, which included a number of really, really important ones for modern Wicca, such as Doreen Valiente, Louis Bourne, and Patricia Krauser and Eleanor Bone. And the Gardnerian community spread throughout Britain and America and Australia in the late 1950s and early 1960s. So it really did have a lot of influence, and he's known in many ways as the father of modern Wicca. And you can absolutely still become part of the Gardnerian tradition of witchcraft, and there is a great deal that you can learn, and you can become a genuine modern Wiccan witch if you so choose to actually do that. Um, we know that Gardner, he was an interesting person. Um, it was his idea to somehow create the great cone of power with the great circle, and through that draw down the greatest of magical energy. And in fact, during the war, um, believe it or not, the government got them involved to send power at Berlin to force them not to cross the sea. And I suppose it's arguable that it worked. We are talking about English witches, particularly the Gardnerian tradition, right, at the moment. The Nazis did not cross the sea, so maybe the witches worked. Now we know that he did quite a lot, and he had a hand at least in the modern religion of Druidry, which again, of course, is supposed to be founded on the original. And he founded the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. Um, so he affected a lot of the interest in the old ways of England and why it mattered. Um, and his things weren't like Crowley was very interested in the Key of Solomon and more of the what we can call the mathematical styles of magic, whereas Gardner was very much interested in the older styles, which is not the same. Um, so he was true to the at least the view or the interest in the older ways. Um, he was a member of the ancient Druid order as well and attended quite a few of the midsummer rituals at Stonehenge, which is fair. He was part of the Folklore Society um, and knew a hell of a lot. He also was a member of the Society for Psychical Research, what we would nowadays refer to as a psychic. Um, So, yes, did a lot. And through him, you have your basics um, of how to be a witch according to his tradition. This, of course, was taken on by Doreen Valiante and others, and this became modern Wicca. And in fact, I do believe that the current head of Wicca in Britain is the granddaughter or great granddaughter, one of the two, of Aleister Crowley, and that's Vivian Crowley. So there you go. Um, there was that side of things. It caused a lot of people to write a lot of very important books, and we find friends that he met, including the poet Robert Graves, whose book The White Goddess is absolutely critical to the formation of Wicca. So he, like him or hate him, he was very much one of the great beginners of Wicca as we know it. But he was not the only one. The other very important one we need to know about is Alexandrian Wicca, which is the other version, and it was founded by Alexander's, also known as the King of Witches, who with his wife Maxine established the tradition in the United Kingdom in the 1960s. Alexandrian Wicca is similar in many ways to Gardnerian, but there are differences. The tradition is said to be largely based on Gardnerian Wicca, and Sanders was trained and initiated in that, but also contains elements of ceremonial magic and Kabbalah, which Sanders studied independently. Now, remember that Kabbalah and ceremonial tend to be mathematical styles of magic. They're very precise. You've got to have the right things done in the right way at the right times. It's far more focused in that regard. So, at a point, they caused this form to be created, and it was taken up and went on, and it's also practiced all over the world, including Canada, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, United States, Brazil, and there you go, end of thoughts, ta-da, South Africa. It's similar to other Wiccan practices. It emphasizes gender polarity, with which can be seen in the Sabbath rituals, with the focus of the relationship between the goddess and the god. Compared to Gardnerian, Alexandrian is a bit more eclectic, and that there's more of a feel that if something works, use it, and if it doesn't, don't. So tool use, deities, elemental names, and so on differ. Whether or not you should be skyclad, which in Gardnerian tradition, yes, you should. In this, you can. You don't have to. Training is emphasized. Ceremonial practice is very important. Enochian magic, Hermetic Kabbalah, all mathematical styles, which fit to what Alex liked and considered more important. Whereas your Gardnerian was very much more nature and natural, if that makes sense. Do I believe in God? Believe or follow the religion of? And which God? He may, James. But in reference to, it's a matter of which religion you're talking about. There are so many religions in the world that can be considered that you have to be quite specific. Now, these, of course, are what we refer to as modern Wicca. But there are a number of other traditions as well. Do I believe in Jesus? No, it's a myth. And we find absolutely that there are different traditions which have developed after the main traditions began, such as the Algard tradition in the United States. We also have versions like the Kthnoi Alexandrian Wicca and the Starkinder line. So there's quite a few versions that have grown and developed on from these. Thank you, Matt. That's very kind. Tuvia, I don't. I do believe in a creator such as, but I am agnostic, we shall say. So, no, I don't follow formal religion. And I don't think that formal religion is good for you for a number of different reasons of my own. But in case you're wondering, I used to be Catholic, was a member of the Catholic Church, and was in fact a monk as well in the Catholic Church for about 9 years. So, yes, I have read the Bible. I think I am probably legitimate in saying I've read more of the Bible than most people. I have read it cover to cover 4 solid times, as well as have a degree in theology and have studied it intensely. So, yes, and I've also studied comparative religions. So, if that answers the questions that are about to follow, yes, I do this entirely because I'm interested in it, because I find the weird and the wonderful and the unexplained fascinating. And I do it largely because I'm amused by it, and I think it's good to know how things work in different places around the world and what people do believe. I think it's a good thing. So, yes, I absolutely do like to learn these things. I have so far on my lives gone through ghosts, curses, aliens. Now we're on to witches, and who knows what the next thing might be. There will be all sorts of weird things to talk about because the world is full of it, and I do enjoy that. And we are doing English witches today because we go country to country and look at what different people say about different things. Is it good? Is it bad? Should it be acceptable? I will say that I have found certain things in doing my examinations that I find to be quite interesting. Endless Thoughts, you were asking about learning. There are a number of schools. The most prominent Wiccan ones are going to be the Gardnerian and the Alexandrian, and it's very easy to find out more about them. Whether or not they are the best ones is another story. But absolutely, there's plenty of ways to learn more, and probably the best format to begin is the introduction to Wicca that was written by Raymond Buckland. Very, very interesting. But very much as well, a bit of a dry text because he is strongly a scholar. So, in that regard, he's not the exciting and fun one like, say, Silver Ravenwolf. But Silver Ravenwolf, who is very popular, mainly among 9-year-old girls who also like unicorns and rainbows, is quite frankly, in my opinion, a fruitcake who is more interested in selling books and being glittery poopy than accurate in any manner or form. And anybody that uses her books as the basis should probably be shot on principle. Raven Grimassi, brilliant writer and quite serious, and has several very, very good books. Sadly, I believe he has passed on, but a brilliant author and historian. But again, it's going to depend on what your preference is, whether or not you wanted to follow Wicca or if you wanted to follow one of the older religions, because there are others that are more important. If you're interested in the old Anglo-Saxon, one book that you cannot absolutely cannot avoid is The Way of Weird by Brian Bates, which is an absolutely brilliant book, really and truly an amazing story, and really gives insight into the old Anglo-Saxon view of things, which matters if you're interested in that regard at all. But again, as we say, there's no lack of other versions of important things to be considered, dependent on what your interest is. I will say that one thing I have discovered is that you can find anything on Google, true. However, and this is very, very important, an incredibly huge amount of the stuff that you find on Google shows that just as there are a great many idiots that you will encounter in real life, you can also encounter a great many idiots on the internet. And I've read some truly terrifying things that showed that the people that wrote them did not for a second think, got a lot of their stuff out of video games, which is quite frightening, and are truly quite a little bit deranged. It's worrying. I prefer to read proper scholastic books on things in order to get real facts, and even those sometimes can't necessarily be entirely accurate. I did find somebody claiming at least to be able to teach you to be a proper black witch and necromancer, which is pretty recently in England and America, historically could have got you killed for claiming. In the modern day now, there are several cultures that I can think of that it will get you executed if you go around claiming to teach that and being able to do that. There are those that really and truly are a bit weird and out there. And I'm going to have to say that in a number of cases, they were quite frightening. Huge thanks for the likes there. What you can find on the internet is not always a good thing. Let's just say that. Uh, if you're going to try to learn anything off the internet, and you can, there's some very good stuff out there. Bear in mind its scholastic origins. Bear in mind that words change their meanings over time and place very, very much. And words really do matter when you're talking about particularly this kind of thing. I would say that traditional witchcraft in England does in no way incorporate what I would refer to as the mathematical forms. That's just not a thing. It's really, it wasn't just like in traditional Zulu craft. By and large, you will never get chants or spoken spells. You just don't. It's not how it works. You will certainly get potions and amulets and divinations and such, but the style doesn't support it. Traditional British magic also does not include Kabbalism and all of that. That we will find actually comes from the Middle East by and large. And when we get to those areas, we will absolutely see that. But of course, in the modern day, people mix in all sorts of stuff. And Wicca is probably a good example. I would say that if you're looking for something closest to the original English magic, Gardnerian Wicca is fair. But the old Anglo-Saxon would be better. But the old Anglo-Saxon, of course, is related to the old Chthonic, which you will see that side as well, which is in turn where you get a lot of your Viking stuff from. The Irish would have been quite similar to the Anglo-Saxon, but they had their own few sets, and they had their own views of what was important. And of course, music played a much greater role for the Irish, and I suspect also for the Scottish, um, though proving that's difficult because records are not easily found anymore. Usually they're more worried about accusing of devil worship and taking it from there without actually looking at any of the cultural or historical um, beliefs behind these things. So we need to understand as well that most of English witchcraft, such as it was of the theocentric. So it was a religion, it was the original religion. Um, it wasn't just sorcery or that kind of thing. It wasn't shamanic at all. It was all theocentric. The shamanic styles tend to come from other countries. Um, but there was a great belief in a lot of spirits and more. And the stories of the elves and the fairy and such definitely held a big influence, as those were considered to be spirits that either could aid you or might definitely have to be protected against in that regard. Um, and so your Irish had a lot of fairy. There were less in the lower parts of England. Um, you had different ones. In Wales, you had similar to the Irish fairy, but much darker. And if you read the Mabinogion, you'll get far more understanding of the Welsh view of the fairies and spirits. Um, for the Irish, you would need to read things like the Tain Bo Culain and those kind of texts to really understand um, how that sort of thing occurred and where it comes from in that regard. But Lower England, it was much simpler. There was a certain shamanic bent to it, but instead of going the route of the way things happen in South Africa, though it's certainly similar, they went with the spoken word as being what was important. So that mattered. And it changed their style. So the spoken word, the chant, um, along with certain potions and things, not really candles and stuff, as you will find was very popular with Kedoble and Santeria and that kind of thing, and Le Sort, so that you know, those things came from that, um, which was a very different kind of viewpoint, I think. But I will say that at a certain point, the English craft was certainly among the coolest. They really did have some fascinating views of things. The way that the powers moved, the ley lines and things is absolutely from your English view of things. Um, and some pretty cool ideas of manipulating the world around you through magic and such. And of course, the Pendle Witches and all of that time, I think in many ways that was an angry response to unfair treatment more than anything. They may well have been cunning people as well, cunning folk, which isn't really quite the way we view a witch. Um, but when they were accused, they reacted very badly because, of course, they were accused of Satan worship and all. And that was unfair. But, I mean, you protect your own. And they probably responded very badly, but, well, what do you expect? And that led to more fights back and forth. Um, it's that kind of thing. And yes, you're quite right. I find with all forms of witchcraft, it is crazy. And politics and society absolutely plays a huge part. And many accusations have nothing to do with whether or not you were guilty of witchcraft, and everything to do with whether or not I wanted your land or whatever. So make of that as you will. It seems to be a common theme. It happened in the Americas. Absolutely. It happened in Latin America. Absolutely. It happened in England. Absolutely. But though I do find it very interesting that, except when the sort of the witch craze was going on, by and large, nobody saw witchcraft as really a crime, but they would um, punish you if you did a crime using witchcraft. So many of those that were uh, put on trial were not actually put on trial so much for witchcraft, which was considered to be a misdemeanor at worst. It was for doing a crime using witchcraft. So, like Mary Read was actually on trial for murder and fraud, which she did via witchcraft, and therefore uh, she got a rap on the knuckles for the witchcraft and was executed for the murder. So make of that as you will, because it's definitely an interesting sort of stance. There you go. That sounds amazing, Endless Thought. Thank you so much. Um, I would love to know what you intend to try, but you can let me know tomorrow. How's that? And we shall see from then. But yes, sleep well and have a wonderful evening. I know you've had a busy day, so rest well. And absolutely, we will see you tomorrow. Because as we all know, we get together at 10 o'clock South African time. So GMT plus 2 every day in the evening, except for Sundays, because Sundays is not a day for work. And absolutely, remember everybody, like, share, subscribe, do all of the good things, and may you all have an amazing, wonderful evening. We will come back, of course, with a new location. I don't know if any of you have a particular place that you would like to talk about the witches of. If there's anywhere that you particularly would like to do next, do let me know, either now or you can send me a message. But absolutely, we will keep going around and looking at the weird and the wonderful, the supernatural and the paranormal, and all of the strange things that may or may not be out there. Because after all, what is the point of living in a world of such wonder if we do not take the time to wonder at it? And while, as has been pointed out on more than one occasion, Karina, that I am quite crazy and I look at far too many things, um, you know what? Maybe I am. And I do enjoy it. And perhaps that is the critical point. If nothing else, enjoy. Because how else will you live your life? What would be the point? I must say, tonight has been a fascinating one, and I can tell you for nothing, if you're actually interested in the history of witchcraft, Britain have a heck of a lot more than just the little we have barely touched on. The Pendle Witches alone have all kinds of stories, and in fact, there's a number of books that they inspired. Joseph Delaney, Yes, Joseph Delaney, I think, was the author, did the absolutely brilliant series, The Spook's Apprentice. Uh, and that, of course, was based on the Lancaster Pendle witches. And in fact, they are mentioned in the books, as is Malkin Tower and more. And that alone should give you a great deal to consider. Now, what we haven't touched too much on quite yet, but we need to, is Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General, the man with the pin. Now, we think of pins these days as being little things, but back in the day, pins could be quite large, and they were often used, for example, by ladies to secure their hats on their head. And we're talking a good 6 inches of pin here. And they would be stabbed into people's bodies to see if they reacted and if there was any spot where they didn't, showing that they were absolutely a witch. There were all kinds of familiars that were said to exist that the witches used. And of course, it was very much a part of fear on the side of the church. And I see that a very suspicious looking apple has turned up, and we are glad for that. But my dear sir, you are eminently late because you've missed all the good stuff, which is a terrible thing. Um, I don't know which country you're coming from, but normally 10 o'clock South African time, which is GMT +2, is when we start. And we we would very much enjoy having you uh, join us early on and commenting lots as well, because we've just done the whole of the English witches. Now, I don't know, Karina, what do you think? What country should we do next um, to look at in that regard, or anyone else come to that? Is there any particular country that people are keen to find out more about? Do let me know, because I would like to hear your opinions. I don't know, suspicious looking apple. Do you have any? China. China's good. There are actually a number of interesting witches and crafts in China. So, seeing as you've jumped in quick there, we will do China and its witches next. And I dare say you will find that there's a lot of interesting things. Do you know there's even witchcraft related martial arts? Um, Chinese monkey style has a whole lot of sorcery connected to it, as does beggar style of kung fu, which is connected to both sorcery and varying other craziness that is not unlike um, the Chinese version of how the ninja started in Japan, which is very interesting as well. So, a whole collection of fascinating stuff when it comes to sorcery and magic in China. Um, so, we shall do China next, just for you. So, hopefully, you will not have too heavy a day's work on the morrow, and you will be able to come in and hear a little more. And much thanks for the rose there. It's always nice to get flowers, it seems, and certainly on TikTok that is the case. So I'm very pleased. But for the rest of you, remember, like, share, subscribe. We need that for support of the channel. Without that support, I'm afraid it becomes difficult to keep the channel going. And there are so many things to do. And of course, don't forget, I actually have got 2 channels. This one is for the weird and the wonderful. The other one is not yet able to go live, but it is on survival on Blackbones 124. So have a go and check out that if you're interested in survival. There's videos on that as well, which may or may not be interesting to you. Depends on which weirdness you like. And with that said, I am afraid that we are going to have to end for tonight. Thank you so much for all of you who have joined in and who have come. And special thanks for the wonderful blessing from Matt Benparath. Was very kind of you, and I do appreciate. I can honestly say that I do enjoy goodwill between all people, no matter their religion. I think that our biggest task in this world, in fact, is to be human, and not enough people try to be that. So, with that said, I shall say thank you to you all, and good night, sleep tight, sleep deep, sleep sweet, but sleep with one eye open, because you never know. It's quite possible that of those things out there that go bump in the night, you may need to keep a holy object near at hand, or maybe a baseball bat, because perhaps those things might go bump for you.